This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel makes plans to double the number of people on the Golan Heights. We examine the prophetic significance of this strategic area. Plus, Chuck Holton looks at the rise of ISIS inside Syria and its threat to the region. And Israeli archaeologists discover sunken treasures from the past, revealing what life was like for the early Christian church. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Recently, the entire cabinet of Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's coalition visited the Golan Heights and announced plans to double the number of people in this strategic region.
The Golan Heights is Israeli. This is obvious. Since 1981, Israeli law was applied on it. It's above any debate. The fact that the Trump administration recognized it and the fact that the Biden administration clarified there is no change in this policy is also of importance. After 10 years of the horrible civil war in Syria, any sensible person understands a peaceful, flourishing, and green Israeli Golan Heights is preferable than any other alternative.
In March of 2019, U.S. President Donald Trump recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Israel thanked him by naming a community after him. But who would want to live so close to a hostile Syrian border that threatens Israel? Here's a story we did before the COVID pandemic with CBN's Scott Ross. He visited the Golan Heights after Trump's recognition, and he met some Israelis who say they wouldn't want to live anywhere else.
And what are we looking at here from this point of view?
So the Sea of Galilee is down, straight down here. Right in front of you, you have the mountains of Tiberias. Right after them, behind them, you have the mountains of Nazareth. And then as you go to the right, to the north, you get to the Upper Galilee. And of course, this is where most of the Gospels took place, around the Sea of Galilee.
Amitai Elon owns a holiday village called Natur at the top of the Sea of Galilee on the Golan Heights. Why have you chosen to live here?
If you want to live in nature, surrounded by beautiful nature and the sound of birds, you can go to the Golan, Galilee, and you can go to the Negev desert.
Now this is a farm.
So it's a farm, it's a space that we use for a lot of things. We're sitting right now in a geodesic dome that is a greenhouse. Sometimes it will hold an event, a venue, or a party, or a camping of a big family. It's kind of magical.
But as beautiful and peaceful as it is, the borders of Lebanon and Syria run along the Golan Heights. Iran, too, is trying to set up bases on the Syrian side nearby from which to attack Israel. How far are you from the Syrian border?
Very close.
There's no threat from the other side?
Except for 67 war and 73 war, this place has been the safest in the country.
Have you grown more apprehensive since Iran has gained a bigger foothold near the Israeli Golan?
If you look at the big picture of the history of this place, thousands of years, we had extremely ups and extremely downs, but we're here.
Further north, we visited security expert Kobi Maron, who was the former Israeli military commander on the Golan Heights and now lives here.
With the unstable situation in Syria, with the Iranian deployment, it's critical for Israel to be here in the Golan Heights and stay here, because with so many challenges, I can't think about the situation that we could be on the 67 line.
Israel captured the Golan Heights in 1967 during the last 2 days of the Six-Day War. The Israeli-Syrian border along the Golan is about 55 miles long. Are you under a constant threat here?
We feel very safe. The Israeli deterrence is very effective. The Iranian regime had a project. They plan to have here across the border 100,000 Shiite militias with the Hezbollah. They plan to have Air Force bases, Navy bases, intelligence centers. They plan to have an advanced industry to produce precise missiles that can be a real threat for the center of Israel and the strategic spots of Israel. So that's why we saw in the last 3-4 years that Israel attacked this Iranian deployment and destroy, and we become very successful.
Some 50,000 people, more than half Jewish Israelis, live on the Golan Heights. But internationally, it's considered occupied territory. In March 2019, however, President Trump broke with tradition and recognized the strategic heights as part of Israel. Israel named a community in his honor, calling it Trump Heights.
It's a dramatic statement. It's unbelievable. It's so important for positive, sure. It's significant declaration because it came from the strongest and the most important Israeli allies, United States. With the Trump recognition about the Golan Heights, there is a big challenge for the next Israeli government. I think we have to bring 100,000 Israelis to the Golan Heights in the next 10 years.
I met Eliyahu Berkowitz in Katzrin, the largest city on the Golan Heights. He immigrated to Israel 28 years ago from New Jersey and moved to the Golan about 7 years ago. Are you at all intimidated by the events surrounding Israel and specifically the Golan?
We're always worried about Israel, but there's a lot to be optimistic about. I don't know what people think of the Golan. They built bomb shelters here when they first settled it, and they've never been used.
Known in the Bible as Bashan, some 635,000 tourists visited the Golan Heights last year, 3/4 of them Christians, to see its stunning views, historical sites, and wineries.
We've always been alone, and when I see Christians interested in Israel, that's something totally new. It gives me incredible optimism. I'm very happy about it. I think I'm helping them to be better Christians, and they're certainly helping me to be a better Jew.
What way?
Because I want to stay here in Israel, and they're helping that. And also, I'm not here just for me. I'm here for the whole world. The Torah was given at Mount Sinai, and we were supposed to be a light unto the nations. If you keep it to yourself, then you're breaking it.
Ilan, who is also a tour guide, summed up Christian commitment to Israel and the Golan Heights.
If you came here between 2000 and 2005, we had kind of an intifada happening here. It was empty, except for Christians.
Why do you think that is?
That is the perspective, that's all. Your connection to the land, is this from the Bible, or is it from CNN, or from a narrow perspective of few years of troubles? If you're connected by narrow perspective of few years, you would say it's dangerous, I won't come.
Do you believe that God is watching over Israel?
Absolutely.
You believe that?
The fulfillment of the prophecy is every step you take in the country. It's hard to ignore it.
Scott Ross for CBN on the Golan Heights, Israel.
Coming up, CBN's Chuck Holton reports from the front lines of Syria and the rising threat of ISIS. After the disastrous U.S. pullout from Afghanistan, ISIS followers were emboldened around the world. In Syria, the group is taking ground again for the first time since 2017. Chuck Holton traveled to the city of Raqqa to bring us this inside look at the comeback of ISIS.
When ISIS seized control of much of Syria and Iraq in 2014, their stated goal was to create an Islamic caliphate that would dominate the entire region with their extremist ideology. It took nearly 5 years for world powers to retake that territory, and even to this day, the scars of war are everywhere in northern Syria, reminders of the brutality of that conflict. Mohammed Ahmed has seen it firsthand, having been shot 6 times while fighting ISIS as an Iraqi soldier.
You see this piece of metal, like pipe, and they cut it, and they weld it, and they make a small hole, and they put explosive stuff inside it, and they make a charger inside it, and with wire, and they bomb like armored or tanks or people, and these things make like huge explosion.
Walking around this abandoned village in northern Syria, it's easy to see how the millions of people who have fled this conflict and gone to other places like Europe and Turkey and even the United States probably are not going to want to come back anytime soon. The animals are gone, their homes are practically destroyed, the wells have dried up, and moving back to this area would be very, very difficult. So that just means that it's going to continue to be costly to the entire world as more and more people become wards of the United Nations, the World Food Program, and other organizations that have to end up feeding these people to help them survive. Once the headquarters of the self-proclaimed ISIS caliphate, the city of Raqqa is still picking up the pieces after the terror group lost the city in 2017. But citizens say things are far better than before.
It's more better for the last time because we have safety, the safety for all children. This is our city. We love her. We love our city. We can't leave our city.
When ISIS was in control, they never knew if they'd live to see another day.
Die everywhere, and the ashes of people everywhere. The horrible thing in every minute in Raqqa. We can't think of anything more than bread.
But threats remain. ISIS has begun taking ground for the first time since 2017 and making coordinated attacks against civilian and military targets. This is the city of Kobani, and it saw some incredibly fierce fighting back in 2014, 2015 during a 5-month siege by ISIS. And the Kurdish forces eventually successfully drove them out. This was ISIS high watermark, but as you can see, there were some unbelievable battles here in that process. Now, ISIS is starting to reconstitute in Syria down south of here in a place called Deir ez-Zor. And so we're starting to see some attacks, and that means we may very well see ISIS resurging around the world in the months to come. Here in northeast Syria, Kurdish fighters are staying vigilant, determined not to let ISIS repeat the horrors of 2014. But these developments are especially concerning as the U.S. looks to end combat operations in neighboring Iraq, leaving many in the region fearing a repeat of the disastrous pullout of Afghanistan last August. And citizens are hoping American foreign policy won't leave them on their own.
Something give you the hope. We looking to the hope. Right. Thank God. Now a little hope, but it's good.
From Raqqa, northern Syria, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
Coming up, Israeli archaeologists uncover rare treasures off the coast of Israel. Recently, Israeli archaeologists discovered spectacular treasures off the coast of Israel. The ancient finds open a window into what life was like in the early Christian church. At the entrance of the harbor of Caesarea, divers from the Israel Antiquities Authority made a rare discovery.
To find two different shipwrecks mixed together on the same site in a difference of more than 1,000 years. To try to imagine that the ship was wrecked in the Roman period at the site, and then 1,000 years later another ship was wrecked on maybe on the top of it or in the air of it. It was really interesting.
In one area, Sharvit and his partner found both bronze coins from the 3rd century and silver coins from the 14th century.
They are amazing, actually, from our point of view, because they are telling a story. It's not only the artifacts, it's the whole story of all the shipwreck. What is the ship were doing there? The period, what was the position or the situation of what was happening with the ship.
The treasures also included a bronze eagle figurine, a symbol of Roman rule, and a red gemstone with the carving of a lyre, or what's known as David's harp. In the book of 1 Samuel from the Bible, it says David played his harp for King Saul. They also found a gold ring with the reference from the New Testament. This is the Good Shepherd ring found in the shipwrecks in the Mediterranean, and it helps tell the story of early Christians in the city of Caesarea during the Roman Empire.
As we know, the symbol of the Good Shepherd is one of the first symbols of Jesus, and actually the idea of the Good Shepherd was adopted by the most of the local population who actually were looking forward into the new religion, because in the Old Testament we actually have the reference to the Good Shepherd and his herd.
The ring also tells a story about Christians from Caesarea nearly 1,700 years ago.
To find a ring from the 3rd century when Christianity basically was still underground. Christians were persecuted during the 3rd century. It's only 100 years later, under Constantine, that Christianity becomes a state religion. So this is a ring of a Christian who lived in a period that Christians were still persecuted and killed, even in Caesarea. I think we have a pretty dramatic find here.
Very simple, very laconic, just the male figure bearing the lamb on his shoulders. Almost exactly the same image we can see on the walls of the catacombs in Rome, in the area where actually the services took place.
The artifacts, coins, and ring help reconstruct the puzzle of Caesarea's past.
The ring is fantastic, of course. I mean, we often find coins from the Roman period. You know, archaeology is like a puzzle. You take different elements, and the wonderful thing in archaeology is that you can piece things together. You know, we have the site, we have the coins, we have the ship, and then this beautiful ring. And everything suddenly comes together.
The ring also makes a personal connection.
This ring connects you to the people, right? Like, especially when you find something, I'm talking about just myself, when I see something like that, it's something which is very personal in a way, right? You try to imagine the particular person who was wearing this ring, what were his thoughts or beliefs. It's really touching. I'm not a religious person by myself, but when I see something like that, I feel this connection to someone who lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
The discoveries also reveal the port of Caesarea had a longer history than previously thought.
Because some of the people, or some of the archaeologists were thinking that the harbor was collapsed in the 1st century AD. Now we realize that the commerce and the ship were coming from all over the Mediterranean, also to Caesarea, in a later period, especially in the late Roman and early Byzantine periods.
Caesarea played a prominent role in the early church. The book of Acts documents the first Christian baptism of a non-Jew happened there. And from Caesarea, the Apostle Paul helped take the gospel to the world. Coming up, a tribute to Pastor Ray Bentley of Maranatha Chapel, pastor, author, and a friend to Israel. Well, finally, Pastor Ray Bentley, founding and senior pastor of Maranatha Chapel in San Diego, California, passed away this week. His church released this statement. With grieving hearts, we need to let you know that our dear Pastor Ray went home to be with the Lord this afternoon due to complications of COVID. We are all in shock and heartbroken. We find comfort in knowing that he is rejoicing in heaven with his beloved Jesus. Pastor Bentley founded Maranatha Chapel in August 1984 when he began teaching a small Bible study in a recreation center with 30 people. Now, Maranatha serves 7,000 people weekly through its various ministries. He reached thousands more on his daily radio show, Maranatha Radio, as he takes the whole gospel to the whole world. Many of his messages and devotionals can be seen on his website. Bentley also founded the Nehemiah Fund, an outreach ministry dedicated to helping and blessing Israel and her neighbors. The ministry is based on the scripture in Genesis 12:3. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Many considered Bentley an expert on biblical prophecy. He wrote the Holy Land Key, unlocking end times prophecy through the lives of God's people in Israel. He also just completed a trilogy called The Elijah Chronicles, along with Brock and Bodie Tenney. These geopolitical thrillers centered around Jerusalem and brought end-time prophecy to life. He discussed that trilogy with CBN News last year in this interview.
Christians need to wake up and realize what time it is. We can argue on little details here and there, but the big picture is we're living in the most prophetic Kairos hour that the church has ever known before. And, I hope people get excited about it. And then I pray that turns into a fire that burns in their heart to, in these days, be bold, not be afraid, not be intimidated, not to, hide your light under a bushel. But this is the time to speak up, be bold, share your faith with your family, your friends. We're kind of literally living in the days of the church of the book of Acts, where there was persecution, opposition, political upheaval, tremendous harassment coming against Paul as he travels 3 missionary journeys, planning these churches and synagogues, and some are accepting, some are fighting. Everything's happening literally as it was 2,000 years ago. To me, it's the most exciting time to be alive and to be a child of God. Step into the story. God is, this is not for us to just sit in the stands, eat popcorn and say, wow, look what's happening to the Jews and the believers in Israel or the Middle East or whatever. God is calling us to get out of the stands, put your popcorn on the side, walk down on the field, whether that field is Europe or Asia or Africa or America, you're on the field and you've got plays. The coach is saying, I'm sending you in. You have a role to play today. There's a reason why you're living and why you are here and why God chose you out of, the last 2,000 years. No, I picked you to live in the year 2021 with everything happening in Israel, in the Middle East, with the Abraham Accords. And I need you to be a light. And I want you to step into the story. Don't just read the story. Don't just tell the story. Don't watch merely the story, but step into the story.
In Bentley's infectious way, he encouraged his church listeners and readers to step into the story and be a part of God's end-time plans. Please pray for Bentley's wife, Vicki, their family, and for the church during their time of mourning. Like so many others around the world, I will miss him as a friend, a brother in the Lord, and a wonderful example of a godly man who loved people and Jesus with all his heart. Because of our faith, we look forward to seeing him again. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.